She was just adjusting the thermostat in the Admiral's conference room when the climate control system failed completely during the most important briefing of the year. International delegates sweating through their dress uniforms, emergency protocols activated, and everyone scrambling for solutions. That's when Sarah Mitchell, the quiet HVAC contractor in faded work clothes, calmly walked to the main electrical panel and did something that made Admiral Robert Hayes stop mid-sentence and stare. But it wasn't her technical skill that silenced the room. It was when she lifted the back of her shirt to access a tool from her belt, revealing 3 perfectly round entry scars along her spine and 1 jagged exit wound near her ribs. The Admiral had seen enough combat to recognize those marks instantly. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew about the woman fixing his air conditioning changed forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cut through the humid Florida air at Naval Air Station Pensacola with the kind of intensity that promised another scorching day. The palm trees lining the main road barely swayed in the still air, their fronds hanging limp like exhausted flags. By 8 in the morning, the asphalt was already radiating heat waves, and the ancient air conditioning units scattered across the base were groaning under the strain of trying to keep pace with another brutal Gulf Coast summer. Sarah Mitchell pulled her white contractor van into the parking lot outside Building 47, the base's primary administrative complex, where visiting dignitaries and high-ranking officers conducted their most sensitive business. The building was a monument to military efficiency, all clean lines and reinforced concrete, designed to withstand hurricanes and house secrets in equal measure. Its windows were tinted dark enough to prevent any curious eyes from seeing inside. And the multiple satellite dishes on the roof suggested this was where important conversations happened. She grabbed her tool bag from the passenger seat, a battered canvas case that had seen more miles than most people's cars. The bag was organized with the kind of precision that spoke of someone who couldn't afford to waste time hunting for the right tool when minutes mattered. Every screwdriver had its place. Every wire stripper was exactly where her muscle memory expected to find it. The bag was heavy, but she carried it like it weighed nothing, the way someone carries something they've been carrying for years. Sarah's appearance was carefully unremarkable. Khaki work pants that had been washed so many times they'd faded to the color of sand, steel-toed boots that had walked through more places than anyone would guess, and a navy blue polo shirt with Mitchell Mechanical Services embroidered in simple white letters. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her only jewelry was a simple watch with a face scratched from years of crawling through tight spaces and working with her hands. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like, a local contractor hired to maintain the building's climate control systems. The security checkpoint at Building 47's entrance was staffed by 2 Marines who took their jobs seriously. They checked her credentials with the thoroughness of people who understood that routine was what kept everyone safe. Her contractor badge was legitimate, her background check had come back clean, and her work orders were properly authorized. Everything was exactly as it should be, which was exactly how Sarah preferred it. She signed the visitor log with the same neat handwriting she'd been using on official documents for more years than she cared to count, and made her way through the metal detector without setting off so much as a whisper. The interior of Building 47 was kept at a comfortable 72 degrees, a small miracle of engineering that required constant maintenance and adjustment. The building housed some of the Navy's most important administrative functions, from personnel records to strategic planning, and the people who worked here expected their environment to be perfect. A broken air conditioning unit wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a threat to the sensitive electronic equipment that made modern military operations possible. Sarah had been maintaining the building's systems for 6 months now, ever since Mitchell Mechanical Services had won the contract through a competitive bidding process that she'd navigated with the same attention to detail she brought to everything else. The Navy appreciated contractors who showed up on time, did quality work, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Sarah checked all those boxes and had earned the kind of trust that came from consistent reliability. Her first stop was always the main mechanical room in the basement, a cathedral of pipes, ducts, and electrical systems that most people never saw but that kept the entire building functioning. The room hummed with the constant white noise of fans, pumps, and compressors working in harmony. Sarah knew every sound in that room, could identify a failing bearing or a loose belt from 3 floors away. This morning, everything sounded normal, but she ran through her diagnostic routine anyway, because cutting corners was how small problems became big problems. The building was already busy with the controlled energy that preceded important events. Naval officers moved through the corridors with purposeful strides, their uniforms crisp despite the early hour. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Administrative staff hurried between offices carrying folders marked with classification levels that Sarah pretended not to notice. The phones rang constantly, and every conversation seemed to carry an undercurrent of urgency that suggested something significant was happening. Sarah had learned to read the rhythms of military installations the way farmers read weather patterns. The base was preparing for something big, something that required international coordination and brought together people who normally worked in different hemispheres. The signs were subtle but unmistakable: increased security patrols, more frequent communications checks, and the kind of nervous energy that preceded high-stakes operations. She made her way to the 3rd floor, where the VIP conference rooms required the most precise environmental control. These were the spaces where admirals briefed senators, where international agreements were hammered out in climate-controlled comfort, and where the temperature needed to be exactly right, because nobody wanted to explain to a 4-star general why he was sweating through his dress uniform during a video conference with allied commanders. The conference room at the end of the hall was the crown jewel of Building 47, a space designed to impress foreign dignitaries and provide the perfect environment for sensitive discussions. The room featured a massive mahogany table that could seat 20 people, state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment, and windows that offered a commanding view of the parade ground, where ceremonies that made the evening news were conducted with military precision. Sarah entered the room with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there, even if she was just there to check the thermostats. The space was empty except for the distant sound of vacuum cleaners and the soft hum of the air conditioning system that kept the room at a constant temperature, regardless of what was happening outside. She opened her tool bag and began her routine inspection, checking airflow rates, filter conditions, and sensor calibrations with a methodical thoroughness that had become second nature. The work was familiar enough that her hands could perform it while her mind processed other information. The conference room's walls were lined with portraits of naval heroes and maps of strategic importance, the kind of decor that reminded everyone who entered that decisions made in this room had consequences that reached around the world. The table was already set for an important meeting, with leather folders at each seat and water glasses that caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Sarah had just finished adjusting the main thermostat when she heard voices in the corridor outside. The conversation was loud enough to penetrate the heavy door, and the tone suggested frustration mixed with authority. She recognized one of the voices as belonging to Admiral Robert Hayes, the base commander whose reputation for demanding excellence was matched only by his reputation for supporting the people under his command. Admiral Hayes was the kind of officer who had earned his stars through a combination of tactical brilliance and unshakable integrity. He'd commanded ships in hostile waters, managed complex international operations, and built a career on making the right decisions when the Stakes were highest. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd been tested in ways that most people never would be, and when he spoke, people listened. The conversation in the corridor was about tomorrow's International Naval Cooperation Summit, a gathering that would bring together senior officers from allied nations to discuss strategy, share intelligence, and coordinate responses to emerging threats. The summit represented months of planning and preparation, and every detail had to be perfect because the relationships built in decisions made would influence military operations for years to come. Sarah continued her work, making minute adjustments to ensure that the conference room's environment would be flawless when the delegates arrived. The temperature had to be exactly right, the humidity controlled to prevent static electricity that could interfere with electronic equipment, and the air circulation designed to ensure that everyone in the room could hear clearly without the distraction of noisy ventilation systems. As she worked, she became aware of other voices joining the conversation in the corridor. Petty Officer Jake Morrison's voice was easily recognizable, carrying the confident tone of someone who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with enough volume and determination. Morrison was the kind of sailor who'd risen through the ranks by being reliable and vocal, and who assumed that his experience entitled him to opinions about everything that happened on the base. His partner in most conversations was Seaman Tommy Rodriguez, whose voice carried the eager-to-please quality of someone still trying to prove himself in an environment where competence was measured by results rather than enthusiasm. Rodriguez had been at the base for 8 months, long enough to feel comfortable, but not long enough to understand that some problems required more than good intentions and hard work. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah caught enough fragments to understand that tomorrow's summit was generating the kind of pressure that made everyone want to double-check everything twice. International events brought scrutiny from levels of command that most base personnel never dealt with, and nobody wanted to be the person who explained why a technical failure had disrupted a meeting between admirals and foreign dignitaries. Sarah finished her work in the conference room and moved on to the adjoining briefing spaces, where junior officers would conduct preliminary meetings and support staff would coordinate logistics. These rooms were smaller but no less important, as they'd host the working-level discussions that would lay the groundwork for the high-level agreements hammered out in the main conference room. The day proceeded with the steady rhythm that Sarah had learned to appreciate in military environments. Tasks were completed methodically, problems were identified and solved before they became crises, and everyone understood their role in making sure that tomorrow's summit proceeded without technical difficulties. Sarah moved through the building like a ghost, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. By late afternoon, she'd completed her scheduled maintenance and was preparing to head back to her van when she heard her name called from behind. Chief Petty Officer Lisa Chun was walking toward her with the purposeful stride of someone who had something specific to discuss. Chun was one of the few people on the base who seemed to really see Sarah rather than just looking through her, and their interactions had always been marked by mutual respect. Chief Chun had been in the Navy long enough to understand that the people who kept military installations running weren't always the ones wearing uniforms, and she'd learned to appreciate contractors who took their work seriously. Sarah had earned Chun's respect by consistently delivering quality work on schedule, and by demonstrating the kind of reliability that made everyone's job easier. The conversation was brief but important. Chun explained that tomorrow's summit had generated some last-minute requirements, including the need for emergency backup systems and redundant climate control in case anything went wrong during the critical meetings. Sarah nodded and made notes, understanding that this was the kind of assignment where success was expected and failure wasn't an option. As Sarah packed up her tools and prepared to leave Building 47, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the complexity of what she'd become part of. On the surface, she was just a contractor maintaining air conditioning systems. But beneath that simple description was a web of relationships, responsibilities, and expectations that connected her work to events that would influence international relations and military strategy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself in an environment where competence was the only currency that mattered. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet Vika contractor, would once again demonstrate that sometimes the most important work happened behind the scenes, performed by people whose names would never appear in official reports, but whose contributions made everything else possible. The sun was setting over Pensacola Bay as Sarah drove her van off the base, already planning the next day's work and thinking through the technical challenges that awaited her. She'd built her reputation one successful job at a time, and tomorrow's summit would be another opportunity to demonstrate that trust placed in her hands was never misplaced. The Admiral and his staff could focus on strategy and diplomacy, confident that the technical details would be handled by someone who understood that, in high-stakes environments, there was no such thing as a small mistake. The next morning arrived, with the kind of oppressive humidity that made even seasoned Florida residents wince when they stepped outside. The weather forecast promised temperatures in the mid-90s with humidity levels that would make the air feel thick enough to swim through. For Sarah Mitchell, this meant that every air conditioning unit on the base would be working overtime, and any system that wasn't running at peak efficiency would quickly become a crisis. She arrived at Building 47 30 minutes earlier than usual, knowing that the International Naval Summit would bring scrutiny to every detail of the base's operations. Her van's dashboard thermometer read 87 degrees at 6:30 in the morning, and the sun hadn't even begun to show its full strength. By noon, the building's climate control systems would be fighting a battle against heat that could overwhelm any equipment that wasn't properly maintained. The security checkpoint was busier than usual, with additional Marines processing the credentials of caterers, media technicians, and protocol officers who were arriving early to prepare for the day's events. Sarah moved through the familiar routine of badge checks and metal detectors, but she noticed the heightened alertness in everyone's eyes. Today wasn't just another day at the base. It was the kind of day that careers were made or broken on, depending on how well everyone performed. Their assigned roles. Inside Building 47, the atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. Staff officers hurried through corridors carrying thick briefing folders. Communications specialists tested equipment with the intensity of people who knew that a single technical failure could disrupt carefully choreographed diplomatic discussions. And administrative personnel double-checked arrangements that had been verified multiple times already. Everyone understood that today's summit would be scrutinized by officials whose rank meant that mistakes would be remembered long after successes were forgotten. Sarah made her way to the mechanical room, where she began her morning diagnostic routine with even more attention to detail than usual. Every gauge reading was recorded, every system parameter was verified, and every potential point of failure was inspected with the thoroughness of someone who understood that preventive maintenance was infinitely preferable to emergency repairs. The building's heartbeat was steady and strong, but she knew that the day's demands would test every component to its limits. The first sign of trouble came at 8:15, when Sarah noticed that the humidity sensors in the main conference room were reading slightly higher than optimal. The difference was small enough that most people wouldn't notice it. But in a room where international delegates would be wearing formal uniforms and discussing sensitive matters for hours, even small environmental problems could become significant. Distractions. She made a note to monitor the situation closely and began checking the humidification systems that kept the building's atmosphere within acceptable parameters. As she worked her way through the building's upper floors, Sarah became aware of conversations that revealed the scope and importance of today's events. The summit would bring together senior naval officers from 12 allied nations to discuss coordinated responses to emerging maritime threats, share intelligence about hostile activities in international waters, and establish protocols for joint operations that might be necessary in rapidly evolving geopolitical situations. The discussions would cover everything from submarine tracking technologies to cyber warfare defenses, from humanitarian mission coordination to strategic resource allocation. The decisions made in Building 47's conference rooms would influence military operations across multiple continents and could determine how effectively allied forces could respond to crises that might emerge anywhere in the world's oceans. Sarah understood the weight of responsibility that came with maintaining the technical infrastructure that supported such important work. A climate control failure during a critical briefing could disrupt communications, damage sensitive electronic equipment, or simply make it impossible for participants to focus on complex strategic discussions. Her job was to ensure that environmental concerns never became a factor in deliberations that could affect global security. By 9 o'clock, the building was filled with the controlled chaos of high-level preparation. Protocol officers reviewed seating arrangements that had been designed to reflect diplomatic relationships and alliance structures. Security personnel conducted final sweeps of rooms where classified information would be discussed. Audiovisual technicians tested systems that would connect the Pensacola conference rooms with command centers around the world, allowing real-time consultation with officials who couldn't attend in person. Sarah was adjusting airflow rates in a third-floor briefing room when she first encountered the kind of dismissive attitude that had become familiar during her months at the base. Petty Officer Jake Morrison was holding court near the water fountain, entertaining a small group of junior personnel with observations about the day's preparations that demonstrated more confidence than knowledge. Morrison had the kind of voice that carried further than it should, and his commentary on everything from catering arrangements to security protocols suggested someone who believed that volume could substitute for expertise. He'd been at Pensacola for 2 years, long enough to feel like a veteran, but not long enough to understand the complexity of the operations he was observing. His audience consisted mainly of newer personnel who were still learning to navigate the base's social dynamics. Seaman Tommy Rodriguez nodded along with Morrison's observations, eager to be included in conversations with more experienced sailors. Rodriguez had grown up in San Antonio, where his father worked as an automotive mechanic, and he'd joined the Navy hoping to learn technical skills that would serve him well in civilian life. His eagerness to fit in sometimes led him to agree with opinions he didn't fully understand. The group's conversation drifted to the various contractors and civilian personnel who were supporting the summit preparations. Morrison had strong opinions about the wisdom of relying on outsiders for critical functions, and he wasn't shy about sharing his belief that military personnel could handle most technical challenges more effectively than civilian contractors who didn't understand the stakes involved. Sarah continued her work, making minor adjustments to ventilation controls while listening to Morrison's analysis of base operations. His commentary revealed the kind of surface-level understanding that came from observing military activities without fully grasping the complexity of the systems that made them possible. He knew enough to sound authoritative to less experienced personnel, but not enough to understand the limitations of his own knowledge. The conversation took a more personal turn when Morrison noticed Sarah working at the control panel across conversation. Took a more personal turn. Conversation occurred with personal turn when Morrison noticed Sarah working at the control panel across the hallway. He lowered his voice slightly, but not enough to prevent her from hearing his assessment of her qualifications and capabilities. His observations focused on her appearance, her gender, and his assumptions about the kind of work that civilian contractors were capable of performing in military environments. Rodriguez contributed his own thoughts, drawing on limited experience with civilian contractors at previous assignments. His comments reflected the kind of casual stereotyping that emerged when people made assumptions about others based on superficial observations rather than demonstrated competence. The discussion continued for several minutes, with each participant building on the others' assumptions in a way that created a shared narrative that had little connection to reality. Sarah had heard similar conversations before, and she'd learned that the best response was usually no response at all. Men like Morrison were typically more interested in hearing themselves talk than in learning anything new, and engaging with their assumptions often just provided them with a larger audience for their opinions. She focused on her work, making precise adjustments that would ensure optimal performance from systems that Morrison probably didn't even know existed. The irony wasn't lost on her that while Morrison was questioning her qualifications, she was performing maintenance on systems that his comfortable working environment depended upon. The air conditioning that kept him cool, the electrical systems that powered his equipment, and the communication networks that connected him to the broader Navy infrastructure all required the kind of specialized knowledge that took years to acquire and constant attention to maintain. As the morning progressed, Sarah moved through the building like a shadow, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. She checked pressures and temperatures, calibrated sensors and controls, and made the countless small adjustments that kept complex systems running smoothly. Her work was the kind that only became visible when it wasn't done properly, which meant that success was measured by the absence of problems rather than the presence of recognition. The building continued to fill with personnel preparing for the afternoon's main events. Foreign naval officers arrived in dress uniforms that reflected the maritime traditions of their respective nations. Interpreters tested translation equipment that would allow real-time communication between participants who spoke different languages. Photographers and videographers prepared to document meetings that would be studied by military historians and policy analysts for years to come. Sarah was testing backup power systems in the basement when she heard the first indication that the day's technical challenges might be more complex than anticipated. A maintenance request came over the radio system, reporting that the primary conference room's temperature was climbing despite the air conditioning system running at full capacity. The problem wasn't yet serious enough to threaten the day's schedule, but it required immediate attention to prevent a minor issue from becoming a major crisis. She grabbed her diagnostic equipment and headed for the main conference room, where she found a situation that was more complex than the initial report had suggested. The room's temperature was indeed rising, but the cause wasn't immediately obvious. The air conditioning system was functioning normally, the ductwork showed no signs of blockage, and the thermostats were responding appropriately to their settings. Sarah began a systematic investigation, checking each component of the climate control system with the methodical thoroughness that had served her well in similar situations. She tested airflow rates, examined electrical connections, and verified the operation of sensors and controls that most people never knew existed. The problem was subtle, the kind of intermittent issue that could be difficult to diagnose, and even more difficult to repair under time pressure. As she worked, Sarah became aware that her activities were being observed by some of the same personnel who'd been discussing her qualifications earlier. Morrison and Rodriguez had positioned themselves where they could watch her troubleshooting efforts, and their body language suggested they were expecting to witness either failure or fumbling incompetence. Their presence added an element of performance to what should have been purely technical work. The diagnostic process revealed that the problem was related to a sensor calibration issue that was causing the system to misread the actual temperature. In the room, the sensor itself was functioning correctly, but its calibration had drifted slightly over time, creating a situation where the air conditioning system thought the room was cooler than it actually was. The fix required precise adjustment of electronic components, using specialized equipment that wasn't part of standard maintenance toolkits. Sarah opened her tool bag and retrieved instruments that caused Morrison and Rodriguez to exchange glances of surprise. The equipment was clearly professional grade, the kind of sophisticated Diagnostic tools that suggested someone with serious technical training and experience. The tools were also expensive, far beyond what a typical HVAC contractor would need for routine maintenance work. She connected the diagnostic equipment to the sensor system and began making calibration adjustments with the precision of someone who understood exactly what each control did and how it affected system performance. Her movements were economical and confident, suggesting muscle memory developed through years of similar work. The complex electronic systems responded to her inputs like instruments being played by a skilled musician. The calibration process required constant monitoring of multiple parameters simultaneously, adjusting one setting while observing how it affected others, and making incremental changes until all systems were working in perfect harmony. It was the kind of work that required both technical knowledge and practical experience, and Sarah performed it with the calm competence of someone who'd solved similar problems many times before. Within 20 minutes, the conference room's temperature had stabilized at exactly the right level, and all system parameters were reading within optimal ranges. Sarah packed up her diagnostic equipment with the same methodical care she'd used to deploy it, ensuring that everything was secured and ready for the next technical challenge that might arise. As she prepared to leave the conference room, Sarah noticed that Morrison and Rodriguez were still watching her, with expressions that suggested they were reassessing their initial assumptions. The confidence they'd displayed earlier had been replaced by something approaching uncertainty, as if they were beginning to realize that their surface-level judgments might not have been entirely accurate. Sarah didn't acknowledge their attention or their changed attitudes. She simply gathered her tools, made final adjustments to the room's environmental controls, and moved on to her next assignment. The conference room was now ready to host discussions between some of the world's most senior naval officers, and the technical details that made such meetings possible had been handled with quiet professionalism. The morning's work had provided the first hint that Sarah Mitchell might be something more than she appeared to be, but it was only a hint. The real test would come later, when bigger problems required more dramatic solutions, and when the stakes were high enough that competence couldn't be hidden behind assumptions and stereotypes. Morrison and Rodriguez returned to their duties with something to think about, while Sarah continued her systematic preparation for a day that would test every system in Building 47. The International Naval Summit was still hours away, but the foundation for its success was being laid one technical adjustment at a time, by people whose names would never appear in the official reports, but whose expertise made everything else possible. The base continued its careful choreography of preparation, with hundreds of personnel working to ensure that every detail would be perfect when the world's attention focused on Pensacola. In mechanical rooms and control centers, on parade grounds, and in conference halls, military and civilian professionals were applying their specialized knowledge to create an environment where international cooperation could flourish and critical decisions could be made with confidence. Sarah Mitchell was just one person in this vast enterprise, but her contribution was becoming more visible to those who knew how to recognize genuine competence when they saw it. The day was young, and the biggest challenges still lay ahead. But the foundation was being carefully constructed by people who understood that excellence was built one perfect detail at a time. By 11 o'clock, the Florida sun had transformed Naval Air Station Pensacola into a furnace that tested every cooling system on the base. The heat rose in shimmering waves from the asphalt, and even the palm trees seemed to wilt under the relentless assault of temperatures that had already climbed past 90 degrees. Inside Building 47, the climate control systems hummed with the desperate efficiency of machinery pushed to its operational limits. Sarah had noticed the subtle signs that others missed completely. The way the main air handler's vibration pattern had changed by fractions of a degree, suggesting bearing wear that wouldn't become critical for months, but could cause efficiency losses today. The almost imperceptible variation in duct pressure that indicated a damper somewhere in the system was beginning to stick. The faint electrical smell that suggested a transformer was running hotter than its design specifications intended. These weren't problems that would cause immediate failures, but they were the kind of emerging issues that could cascade into major crises under the stress of today's demands. Sarah made mental notes of each observation, building a picture of how the building's systems were responding to unprecedented loads. Her years of experience had taught her that preventing problems was infinitely preferable to reacting to emergencies, especially when the stakes included international diplomatic relations. The foreign naval delegations had begun arriving, and their presence added new layers of complexity to the day's operations. Officers wearing the distinctive uniforms of allied nations moved through Building 47's corridors with the confident bearing of people accustomed to command. Their conversations mixed multiple languages, creating a polyglot atmosphere that reflected the international scope of the day's discussions. Sarah was adjusting ventilation controls in a secondary briefing room when she overheard a conversation that revealed just how much pressure everyone was feeling. Two staff officers were discussing backup plans for backup plans, contingencies that would only be necessary if multiple systems failed simultaneously. Their planning reflected the kind of thorough preparation that characterized successful military operations, but it also revealed the anxiety that came with being responsible for events that could influence global security. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Petty Officer Lisa Chun, who was conducting her own inspection of the building's readiness. Chun moved through the corridors with the purposeful efficiency of someone who'd spent years ensuring that military operations proceeded without technical difficulties. Her presence brought a sense of calm competence that made everyone around her perform their duties with greater confidence. Chun paused at the briefing room where Sarah was working, observing the precision with which environmental adjustments were being made. Unlike Morrison and Rodriguez, Chun had the experience to recognize genuine technical skill when she saw it. She watched Sarah's methodical approach to system optimization, noting the way complex controls responded to subtle inputs that suggested deep understanding of their operation. The two women exchanged brief professional courtesies, but their interaction was marked by mutual respect that had developed over months of working in the same environment. Chun understood that contractors like Sarah were essential to military operations, and Sarah appreciated working with military personnel who recognized the value of civilian expertise. Their relationship was built on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions about roles and capabilities. As the morning progressed, Sarah began to notice patterns in the building's environmental data that suggested a more complex challenge was developing. The outdoor temperature was climbing faster than weather forecasts had predicted, and the humidity levels were approaching the kind of oppressive conditions that could overwhelm even well-maintained air conditioning systems. More concerning was the way power consumption was increasing across all systems, suggesting that electrical infrastructure was being stressed in ways that could lead to failures. Her diagnostic equipment revealed that Building 47's power grid was operating within acceptable parameters, but with safety margins that were narrower than optimal. The International Summit was drawing more electrical load than normal operations, with additional lighting, audio-visual equipment, and communication systems all contributing to demand that approached the building's design capacity. Sarah made notes about load distribution and began calculating whether any adjustments could be made to improve system efficiency. The challenge was complicated by the fact that many of the building's electrical systems had been installed years earlier, when energy demands were lower and technology was less sophisticated. Upgrades had been made over time, but they'd been implemented piecemeal rather than as part of comprehensive system redesigns. The result was an electrical infrastructure that worked well under normal conditions but had potential vulnerabilities when pushed to extreme performance levels. Sarah's investigation revealed that the main electrical distribution panel was located in a mechanical room that few people ever visited, And that housed equipment most personnel didn't understand. The panel controlled power distribution throughout Building 47, managing loads and protecting circuits with the kind of automated intelligence that made complex buildings possible. But like all sophisticated systems, it required periodic adjustment and maintenance to continue operating at peak efficiency. She made her way to the mechanical room, where the building's electrical heartbeat was controlled by systems that represented decades of technological evolution. The main distribution panel was a marvel of engineering complexity, with hundreds of circuits, protective devices, and monitoring systems all working together to ensure reliable power throughout the building. Sarah approached it with the respect due to equipment that could be dangerous if handled improperly, but also with the confidence of someone who understood its operation intimately. The diagnostic process required specialized test equipment that wasn't available to typical maintenance personnel. Sarah retrieved instruments from her tool bag that were calibrated for precision electrical measurements, devices that could detect problems invisible to standard multimeters and voltage testers. Her equipment represented a significant investment in professional-grade tools that suggested someone with serious training and extensive experience. As she worked, Sarah became aware that her activities were attracting attention from building personnel, who happened to pass by the mechanical room. Unlike her earlier work on air conditioning systems, electrical troubleshooting involved equipment that looked more obviously complex and potentially dangerous. The diagnostic instruments she was using displayed readouts that clearly required specialized knowledge to interpret, and her confident handling of high-voltage systems suggested expertise that went well beyond routine maintenance. Petty Officer Morrison appeared in the mechanical room doorway, drawn by curiosity about what the civilian contractor was doing with equipment he didn't recognize. His earlier confidence about Sarah's capabilities had been shaken by her competent handling of the conference room climate control problem. But he still harbored assumptions about the limits of civilian technical knowledge in military environments. Morrison's presence was followed by that of Seaman Rodriguez, whose mechanical background gave him enough knowledge to recognize sophisticated test equipment when he saw it. Rodriguez had worked with electrical systems in automotive applications, but the instruments Sarah was using were clearly more advanced than anything he'd encountered. His expression reflected the kind of professional curiosity that emerged when someone realized they were observing expertise beyond their own experience. Sarah continued her diagnostic work without acknowledging her audience, focusing on the complex data patterns that revealed how Building 47's electrical systems were responding to unprecedented demands. The measurements showed that power quality was within acceptable ranges, but with variations that suggested some circuits were being stressed more heavily than others. Load balancing adjustments could improve efficiency and reduce the risk of failures during peak demand periods. The adjustment process required accessing control systems that were protected by multiple layers of security, both physical and electronic. Sarah produced credentials and access codes that surprised her observers, revealing that her clearance levels were significantly higher than her contractor badge suggested. The systems responded to her inputs with the kind of immediate compliance that indicated proper authorization at levels that few base personnel possessed. Her work involved making incremental changes to load distribution patterns, while monitoring their effects on system performance in real time. Each adjustment required understanding how modifications to one circuit would affect others, and how changes in electrical load would influence the mechanical systems that depended on reliable power. It was the kind of complex systems engineering that required both theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Morrison and Rodriguez watched in growing amazement as Sarah performed adjustments that immediately improved system performance across multiple building functions. Power consumption decreased while maintaining full operational capability. Electrical noise levels dropped to improve the performance of sensitive communication equipment, and thermal loads on critical components decreased to extend their operational life and reliability. The work was completed with an efficiency that suggested Sarah had performed similar optimizations many times before, in environments where electrical system reliability was critical to mission success. Her movements were economical and purposeful, wasting no motion on unnecessary actions while ensuring that every adjustment was precisely calibrated for optimal results. As she packed up her diagnostic equipment, Sarah noticed that her observers were looking at her with expressions that mixed surprise, curiosity, and something approaching respect. The casual dismissiveness they'd displayed earlier had been replaced by the kind of attention that emerged when people realized they were witnessing genuine expertise. Morrison's confident assumptions about civilian contractors had clearly been challenged by what he'd observed. The electrical system improvements Sarah had implemented would have immediate benefits for the afternoon's summit activities, but they also represented the kind of preventive maintenance that would improve building operations for months to come. Her work had been invisible to most building occupants, but it had made their comfortable, productive working environment possible by ensuring that critical systems operated at peak efficiency. Sarah's reputation among base personnel was beginning to shift as word spread about her technical capabilities and the quality of her work. The change was subtle but noticeable to anyone paying attention to the informal networks through which information traveled in military communities. She was still just a contractor, but she was increasingly recognized as a contractor whose expertise deserved respect and whose contributions were valuable to mission success. The transformation wasn't complete, and many personnel still saw her as just another civilian performing routine maintenance tasks. But among those who'd witnessed her work firsthand, assumptions were being reconsidered and stereotypes were being questioned. The foundation was being laid for the more dramatic recognition that would come when bigger challenges required more visible demonstrations of her capabilities. By noon, Building 47 was ready to host discussions that would influence maritime security policies across multiple continents. The environmental systems were operating at peak efficiency, electrical infrastructure was optimized for reliability, and communication networks were prepared to connect Pensacola with command centers around the world. Much of this readiness was due to the quiet competence of personnel, whose names would never appear in official reports, but whose expertise made international cooperation possible. Sarah Mitchell had played a crucial role in this preparation, solving technical challenges that could have disrupted critical discussions and implementing improvements that would support successful operations throughout the day. Her work was becoming harder to ignore, and her capabilities were being recognized by people whose opinions carried weight in military environments. The afternoon would bring new challenges and higher stakes as the world's attention focused on Building 47 and the decisions made in its conference rooms. Sarah would be ready, with systems operating at peak performance and backup plans prepared for any contingency that might arise. Her reputation was evolving from invisible contractor to essential technical resource, one successful problem-solving episode at a time. The International Naval Summit was about to begin, and every system in Building 47 was operating exactly as it should, thanks in large part to the expertise of a woman, whose qualifications were far more extensive than her contractor badge suggested. The stage was set for bigger challenges and more dramatic demonstrations of competence as the day's most critical events approached and the stakes continued to rise. Master Chief Kevin Walsh had been observing the morning's activities with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 30 years in the Navy learning to distinguish between competent performance and exceptional skill. Walsh had served on ships where equipment failures could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic disasters, and he'd developed an appreciation for technical personnel who could solve problems under pressure. Walsh had noticed Sarah's work on the electrical systems, and what he'd observed didn't match the profile of a typical HVAC contractor. The equipment she used, the methods she employed, and the results she achieved all suggested someone with training and experience that went well beyond routine building maintenance. His curiosity was professional rather than casual, reflecting years of experience in environments where people's lives depended on accurate assessments of technical capabilities. The Master Chief made his way to the mechanical room where Sarah was conducting final system checks before the afternoon's events began. He approached with the respectful directness of someone who'd learned to appreciate expertise wherever he found it, regardless of the uniform or credentials the expert happened to be wearing. Sarah looked up from her diagnostic equipment as Walsh entered the mechanical room, and their eyes met with the kind of recognition that passed between professionals who understood the importance of technical excellence. Walsh's expression reflected curiosity mixed with respect, suggesting someone who'd recognized competence that deserved acknowledgement. Their conversation was brief but significant, conducted in the technical shorthand that professionals used when they understood each other's expertise. Walsh asked questions that revealed his own sophisticated understanding of complex systems, and Sarah's responses demonstrated knowledge that clearly extended far beyond her official job description. The exchange confirmed Walsh's growing suspicion that Sarah Mitchell was considerably more than she appeared to be. The interaction was observed by Morrison and Rodriguez, who were beginning to understand that their initial assessments might have been not just wrong, but embarrassingly so. The respect that Master Chief Walsh showed Sarah was the kind that had to be earned through demonstrated competence, and it suggested that her technical capabilities were recognized by personnel whose opinions carried significant weight in military environments. As the early afternoon approached, Building 47 hummed with the controlled energy of an organization prepared for important events. Every system was operating at peak efficiency, every contingency had been planned for, and every person understood their role in ensuring that the International Naval Summit would proceed without technical difficulties. Sarah Mitchell had played a crucial role in this preparation, but her contributions remained largely invisible to the senior officers and foreign dignitaries who would soon fill the building's conference rooms. Her work had been essential to creating the environment where international cooperation could flourish, but recognition for her expertise was still limited to the small group of personnel who'd witnessed her capabilities firsthand. The stage was set for bigger challenges and more dramatic demonstrations of competence as the day's most critical events approached and the stakes continued to rise. Sarah was ready, with systems operating perfectly and her reputation slowly but steadily evolving from invisible contractor to indispensable technical resource. The afternoon would test everything that had been prepared, and Sarah's role would become more visible as challenges emerged that required her unique combination of technical knowledge and practical experience. The foundation had been laid, the systems were optimized, and the most important hours of the day were about to begin. The crisis began at precisely 2:15 in the afternoon, just as Admiral Robert Hayes was welcoming the international delegates to what would become the most important naval cooperation summit in recent memory. The main conference room was filled with senior officers from 12 allied nations, their dress uniforms creating a sea of gold braids and colorful ribbons that represented decades of distinguished service across the world's oceans. Admiral Hayes stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, his presence commanding the kind of respectful attention that came from a career built on decisive leadership and challenging circumstances. He'd served in 3 different theaters of operation, commanded carrier strike groups in hostile waters, and earned his stars through a combination of tactical brilliance and unwavering integrity. When he spoke, the assembled delegates listened with the deference due to someone whose judgment had been tested in situations where mistakes carried life and death consequences. The Admiral was midway through his opening remarks when the building's climate control system failed catastrophically. It wasn't a gradual degradation or a minor malfunction that could be managed discreetly. Instead, it was the kind of complete system collapse that transformed a comfortable conference room into a tropical greenhouse within minutes. The temperature began climbing immediately, and the humidity levels spiked to levels that made breathing feel like an effort. The failure couldn't have come at a worse time. The delegates were wearing full dress uniforms designed for ceremonial occasions rather than tropical heat, and many of them were already showing signs of discomfort as sweat began to darken their formal attire. The sensitive electronic equipment that connected the Pensacola conference room to command centers around the world started displaying warning messages as internal temperatures exceeded safe operating ranges. Admiral Hayes maintained his composure with the practiced calm of someone who'd dealt with unexpected challenges throughout his career, but his eyes reflected the kind of focused intensity that emerged when critical situations demanded immediate solutions. The summit represented months of careful planning and diplomatic coordination, and a technical failure that forced postponement or relocation could undermine international relationships that had taken years to build. The buildings. Staff responded with military efficiency, implementing contingency plans that had been developed for exactly this kind of emergency. Portable air conditioning units were requisitioned from other facilities. Backup power systems were activated to support additional cooling equipment, and communications personnel began coordinating with off-site locations that could potentially host relocated meetings if the primary venue became unusable. But these emergency measures would take time to implement, and time was the one resource that couldn't be manufactured on demand. The international delegates had coordinated their schedules around today's summit, and any significant delay could force rescheduling that might not be possible for weeks or months. The diplomatic implications of a failed meeting could reverberate through alliance relationships and maritime security cooperation for years to come. Sarah Mitchell was in the basement mechanical room when the crisis alerts began cascading through Building 47's communication systems. Her diagnostic equipment immediately detected the system failures that were causing the conference room catastrophe, and her screens filled with error messages that painted a picture of cascading failures throughout the building's environmental controls. Multiple components had failed simultaneously, creating a situation that exceeded the capacity of standard backup systems. The failure pattern was complex and unprecedented, involving primary air handlers, backup cooling systems, and electrical infrastructure in ways that suggested either catastrophic equipment degradation or systematic sabotage. Sarah's initial analysis revealed that the problems were too extensive and too coordinated to be explained by normal equipment failure, but determining the root cause would require investigation that could take hours while the Keycorps International Summit collapsed in real time. She grabbed her emergency toolkit and headed for the main conference room, where she knew the most critical problems would need immediate attention, regardless of their ultimate cause. Her years of experience had taught her that complex system failures required triage approaches that prioritized the most essential functions while working toward comprehensive solutions that addressed underlying problems. The scene that greeted Sarah when she reached the third floor was unlike anything she'd witnessed during her months at Naval Air Station Pensacola. Military personnel were moving with the controlled urgency of people responding to genuine emergencies, while maintaining the professionalism that characterized elite organizations under pressure. Portable fans had been deployed throughout the corridors, but they were fighting a losing battle against heat and humidity that continued to climb as the building's system struggled with cascading failures. Admiral Hayes was visible through the conference room's reinforced windows, still conducting the summit despite environmental conditions that were rapidly becoming unbearable. His commitment to mission accomplishment was evident in his determination to continue critical discussions even as sweat stained his dress uniform and the foreign delegates showed increasing signs of heat-related distress. The electronic displays that should have been showing strategic maps and intelligence summaries were instead flashing overheating warnings. Sarah approached the conference room with her diagnostic equipment, but her path was blocked by base security personnel who'd been instructed to prevent any unnecessary interruptions to the international meetings. The guards were courteous but firm, explaining that only essential personnel with specific authorization could access the conference areas while sensitive discussions were in progress. The security checkpoint created a frustrating delay while Sarah tried to explain that the environmental emergency required immediate technical intervention. Her contractor credentials provided access to mechanical areas throughout Building 47, but they didn't cover the high-security conference rooms where classified discussions were taking place. The guards understood the severity of the situation, but they also understood that their primary responsibility was maintaining the security of international diplomatic meetings. The impasse was resolved by the arrival of Chief Petty Officer Lisa Chun, who'd been coordinating emergency response efforts throughout the building. Chun immediately recognized that Sarah's technical expertise was exactly what the situation required, and she provided the authorization necessary for Sarah to access the conference room where the most critical problems needed to be addressed. Chun's intervention came just in time, as conditions in the conference room were approaching levels that would force suspension of the summit, regardless of its diplomatic importance. The temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, and the humidity was creating condensation on windows and electronic equipment that threatened to cause additional failures. Several delegates were showing signs of heat exhaustion, and the medical officer was preparing to recommend evacuation if conditions didn't improve quickly. Sarah entered the conference room carrying diagnostic equipment that immediately drew attention from everyone present. Her purposeful movement and professional-grade tools suggested someone with the expertise to address technical problems that had overwhelmed the building's regular maintenance staff. Admiral Hayes paused in his remarks to observe her approach, his experienced eyes taking in details that suggested this civilian contractor might be considerably more capable than her unremarkable appearance indicated. The conference room's environmental controls were located behind an access panel that required specialized tools to open safely. Sarah produced the necessary equipment from her toolkit, revealing instruments that were clearly more sophisticated than standard maintenance gear. Her confident handling of complex systems was evident to everyone watching, and her methodical approach to diagnosis suggested someone with extensive experience in high-pressure technical situations. The diagnostic process revealed that the conference room's climate control failure was part of a building-wide system collapse that involved multiple interconnected problems. Primary cooling equipment had failed due to electrical irregularities. Backup systems had been overwhelmed by demands that exceeded their design capacity, and control systems had malfunctioned in ways that prevented automatic recovery procedures from functioning properly. Repairing the damage would normally require hours of work by teams of specialists, but Sarah began implementing emergency solutions that drew on knowledge and experience that clearly extended far beyond routine building maintenance. Her approach involved bypassing failed components, rerouting system connections, and implementing manual overrides that restored partial functionality while more comprehensive repairs were planned. As she worked, Sarah's tool belt began to shift and loosen from the physical demands of accessing equipment in confined spaces and awkward positions. She paused in her diagnostic work to adjust the belt, reaching behind her back to tighten the buckle and secure tools that had become displaced during her emergency repairs. The movement required lifting the back of her polo shirt to access the belt adjustment, and the gesture revealed something that transformed the atmosphere in the conference room instantly. Along Sarah's spine, 3 perfectly round scars were visible, each about the size of a dime and positioned in a pattern that anyone with combat experience would recognize immediately as entry wounds from high-velocity rifle rounds. Near her ribs, a 4th scar showed the irregular, jagged edges characteristic of an exit wound, where a bullet had tumbled and deformed as it passed through her body. The scars were old but clearly visible, and their positioning suggested wounds that would have been life-threatening when they were inflicted. The pattern and placement indicated someone who'd been shot multiple times in circumstances that spoke of combat rather than accident. Admiral Hayes saw the scars first, and his reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His years of military service had given him extensive experience with combat injuries, and he recognized bullet wounds with the certainty of someone who'd seen too many of them in too many different circumstances. His expression shifted from polite attention to sharp focus, and he stepped back slightly as the implications of what he was seeing registered in his mind. The Admiral's reaction didn't go unnoticed by the other occupants of the conference room. Foreign naval officers who'd served in combat zones throughout their careers recognized the significance of Hayes' response, and they followed his gaze to understand what had caused such a dramatic change in his demeanor. The sight of Sarah's scars created a ripple of recognition that spread through the room like electricity. Sarah became aware of the attention her inadvertent revelation had attracted, and she quickly adjusted her shirt to cover the scars that had been exposed during her equipment adjustment. But the damage was done, and the carefully maintained fiction that she was just another civilian contractor had been shattered by physical evidence that told a very different story about her background and experience. The conference room fell, silent except for the sound of diagnostic equipment and the labored breathing of people struggling with oppressive heat and humidity. But the silence wasn't just about environmental discomfort anymore. It was the kind of charged quiet that emerged when people realized they'd been fundamentally wrong about someone's identity and capabilities. Admiral Hayes studied Sarah with new eyes, taking in details that he'd previously overlooked or dismissed. Her posture, her movement patterns, her confident handling of complex equipment, and her calm competence under pressure all suggested someone with training and experience that went far beyond civilian technical work. The scars provided context that transformed his understanding of who she was and what her presence at Naval Air Station Pensacola might really mean. Sarah continued her emergency repairs with the same methodical efficiency she displayed throughout the crisis, but she was now working under the intense scrutiny of military officers who were reassessing everything they thought they knew about her. Her technical expertise was no longer surprising. It was expected from someone whose scars suggested combat experience in environments where technical failures could have fatal consequences. The repairs Sarah implemented began to show results within minutes of her intervention. The conference room's temperature started to stabilize, humidity levels began dropping toward acceptable ranges, and the electronic equipment that supported international communication started functioning normally again. Her emergency solutions weren't permanent fixes, but they were restoring the environmental conditions necessary for the summit to continue. As the crisis atmosphere in the conference room began to ease, Admiral Hayes approached Sarah with the respectful directness of someone who recognized that he was dealing with a fellow professional whose credentials might be very different from what her contractor badge suggested. His demeanor reflected the kind of serious attention that senior officers reserve for conversations that involved matters of significant importance. The Admiral's questions were carefully phrased, but clearly designed to elicit information about Sarah's background and experience. He asked about her technical training, her previous work assignments, and her familiarity with military operations in ways that suggested he suspected her civilian contractor role might be covering a much more complex professional history. Sarah's responses were professionally courteous, but carefully limited, providing information about her technical qualifications while avoiding details about her background that might compromise operational security or reveal information that wasn't appropriate for public discussion. Her answers confirmed that she had extensive experience with complex systems in demanding environments, but they didn't provide the complete picture that Admiral Hayes was clearly seeking. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Chief Walsh, who'd been coordinating building-wide emergency response efforts and who needed to brief Admiral Hayes on the status of repair operations throughout Building 47. Walsh's presence provided Sarah with an opportunity to return to her technical work while the senior military officials discussed operational matters that required immediate attention. But Walsh's arrival also meant that another experienced military professional was now aware of the questions surrounding Sarah's true identity and capabilities. The Master Chief had already been impressed by her technical expertise, and the revelation of combat-related scars added context that explained the sophistication of her knowledge and the confidence of her performance under pressure. As Sarah completed her emergency repairs and prepared to leave the conference room, she found herself the subject of respectful attention from military officers, who were clearly reassessing their understanding of who she was and what her role at the base might actually involve. The casual dismissiveness that some personnel had displayed earlier was completely gone, replaced by the kind of professional curiosity that emerged when experienced military officers encountered someone whose background deserved investigation. The International Naval Summit resumed with environmental conditions restored to acceptable levels, but the dynamics in the conference room had changed fundamentally. Sarah Mitchell was no longer just the civilian contractor who maintained the building's systems. She was someone whose scars told stories that military officers recognized, and whose technical expertise suggested training and experience that raised questions about her official job description. Admiral Hayes continued to conduct the summit with his characteristic professionalism, but part of his attention remained focused on the implications of what he'd witnessed. Military officers developed instincts about people and situations through years of experience in environments where accurate assessment could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. His instincts were telling him that Sarah Mitchell represented something more significant than routine contractor support. The afternoon's crisis had been resolved through Sarah's technical intervention, but it had also revealed information that would have lasting implications for how she was perceived and treated by base personnel. The carefully maintained anonymity that had allowed her to work invisibly for months had been compromised by circumstances that required her to demonstrate capabilities that couldn't be explained by routine civilian training. Word of the incident began spreading through Building 47's informal communication networks with the speed that characterized military communities when significant events occurred. The story of the civilian contractor who'd saved the international summit, while revealing combat scars that suggested a much more complex background, became the subject of speculation and discussion among personnel who were trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Chief Petty Officer Chun found herself fielding questions from other base personnel who wanted to know more about Sarah's background and qualifications. Chun's responses were professionally appropriate, but clearly indicated that there was more to Sarah's story than her contractor credentials suggested. The chief's respect for Sarah's capabilities was evident, but so was her understanding that some questions might not have simple answers. Petty Officer Morrison and Seaman Rodriguez found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to acknowledge that their earlier dismissive attitudes had been not just wrong, but embarrassingly so. Their assumptions about civilian contractors and their capabilities had been challenged by someone whose expertise clearly exceeded their own, and whose background included experiences that commanded respect from senior military officers. Transformation in how Sarah was perceived by base personnel was subtle but unmistakable. She was still a civilian contractor performing essential technical work, but she was now recognized as someone whose capabilities and experience deserved the kind of professional respect that had to be earned through demonstrated competence in demanding circumstances. Sarah returned to her systematic approach to building maintenance and repair, but her work was now conducted under the watchful attention of personnel who understood that her contributions were essential to mission success. The environmental crisis had revealed not just her technical expertise, but also her ability to perform effectively under pressure in situations where failure could have serious consequences. The International Naval Summit concluded successfully, with agreements reached on maritime cooperation that would influence Allied operations for years to come. The delegates departed with positive impressions of American military professionalism and technical capability, unaware that their comfortable working environment had been maintained by someone whose background included experiences that most of them would recognize and respect. Admiral Hayes made a point of personally thanking Sarah for her critical contribution to the summit's success, and their brief conversation was marked by the mutual respect that characterized interactions between professionals who understood the importance of excellence in high-stakes environments. The Admiral's gratitude was genuine, but so was his continued curiosity about Sarah's background and the experiences that had prepared her for the kind of technical challenges she'd handled with such competence. As the base returned to normal operations following the International Summit, Sarah Mitchell continued her work with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her performance throughout her assignment at Naval Air Station Pensacola. But her role had evolved from invisible contractor to essential technical resource, and her reputation reflected the kind of respect that could only be earned through demonstrated excellence when it mattered most. The scars that had been inadvertently revealed during the environmental crisis became the foundation for a new understanding of who Sarah was and what her presence at the base really meant. Military personnel who'd served in combat zones recognized the significance of those marks, and their respect for her capabilities was reinforced by their understanding of the experiences that had shaped her expertise. Sarah's story had become part of the base's unofficial history, a reminder that competence and dedication could be found in unexpected places, and that assumptions about people's backgrounds and capabilities were often incomplete or incorrect. Her work continued to be essential to base operations, but it was now recognized and appreciated by personnel who understood that technical excellence was often the foundation upon which military success was built. The International Naval Summit had been saved by the quick thinking and technical expertise of someone who'd initially been overlooked and underestimated. Sarah Mitchell's true capabilities had been revealed not through credentials or official recognition, but through her performance when critical systems failed and immediate solutions were required. Her scars told part of her story, but her actions under pressure told the rest, creating a reputation built on competence, reliability, and the kind of quiet professionalism that made complex operations possible. The foundation had been laid for ongoing recognition of Sarah's contributions and capabilities, ensuring that her expertise would be properly utilized and respected in future assignments. She'd proven herself in the most demanding circumstances possible, and her performance had earned her a place among the essential personnel whose work made military excellence achievable. The transformation was complete, from invisible contractor to indispensable professional, one successful crisis response at a time. The weeks following the International Naval Summit brought a transformation to Naval Air Station Pensacola that was both subtle and profound. Sarah Mitchell continued to arrive each morning in her white contractor van, carrying the same battered tool bag and wearing the same unremarkable work clothes that had defined her presence at the base for months. But everything else about her experience had changed in ways that reflected how completely the revelation of her combat scars had altered the dynamics of military life around her. Admiral Hayes had spent considerable time in the days after the summit reviewing classified personnel files and making discreet inquiries through channels that existed outside normal administrative procedures. The information he'd been able to gather was limited by security protocols that protected the identities and backgrounds of personnel involved in operations that officially didn't exist. But what he'd learned had confirmed his suspicions that Sarah Mitchell's contractor credentials covered a professional history that included experiences in some of the world's most dangerous places. The Admiral's investigation had revealed that Sarah's security clearances were far more extensive than anything a typical building maintenance contractor would require, and that her background checks had been conducted by agencies whose involvement suggested work that went well beyond civilian technical support. The pattern of authorizations and restrictions in her file painted the picture of someone who'd been involved in operations where technical expertise had been essential to mission success in hostile environments. More telling were the medical records that Admiral Hayes had been authorized to review, which documented treatment for injuries that were consistent with the scars he'd observed during the environmental crisis. The records were heavily redacted, but they confirmed that Sarah had been wounded in circumstances that involved hostile fire, and that her recovery had required months of specialized medical care at facilities that treated personnel injured in classified operations. The medical documentation also revealed that Sarah's injuries had been severe enough to end whatever operational role she'd been performing before arriving at Pensacola. The combination of spinal and abdominal wounds suggested someone who'd been fortunate to survive and who'd required extensive rehabilitation to regain the physical capabilities necessary for any kind of active work. Her current assignment as a civilian contractor appeared to be a carefully constructed cover that allowed her to continue contributing her expertise while maintaining the security protocols that protected her identity and operational history. Admiral Hayes found himself in the unusual position of having a civilian contractor on his base whose actual qualifications and experience might exceed those of many of his uniformed personnel. The situation required delicate handling, as acknowledging Sarah's true background could compromise security protocols, while ignoring her capabilities would waste resources that could be valuable to base operations and mission effectiveness. The Admiral's solution was to begin including Sarah in planning discussions and technical evaluations that had previously been limited to military personnel with appropriate security clearances. Her insights into complex systems and her experience with operations in challenging environments proved invaluable for projects that required both technical expertise and understanding of how equipment needed to perform under demanding conditions. These expanded responsibilities were presented as routine contractor utilization, but they represented a significant change in how Sarah's expertise was recognized and employed. She found herself consulted on facility upgrades, security system improvements, and emergency preparedness planning that drew on knowledge and experience that clearly extended far beyond routine building maintenance. The change in Sarah's role was noticed by base personnel who'd witnessed her performance during the summit crisis. Chief Petty Officer Chun began routing technical problems and maintenance challenges through Sarah's office, recognizing that her problem-solving capabilities often exceeded those of standard military maintenance personnel. The requests were always framed as contractor services, but they increasingly involved complex issues that required the kind of expertise that Sarah had demonstrated during the environmental emergency. Master Chief Walsh found himself consulting with Sarah on projects that involved integration of new technologies with existing base infrastructure. Walsh's 30 years of military experience had taught him to recognize genuine expertise, regardless of the uniform or credentials that accompanied it. And he'd learned to appreciate Sarah's ability to analyze complex systems and identify solutions that weren't immediately obvious to personnel with more conventional training. The transformation in Sarah's working relationships extended beyond senior personnel to include interactions with the junior sailors who'd initially dismissed her capabilities. Petty Officer Morrison discovered that many of the technical problems his team encountered could be resolved more efficiently by consulting with Sarah than by following standard troubleshooting procedures that didn't account for the unique characteristics of Pensacola's aging infrastructure. Morrison's change in attitude was gradual but unmistakable, evolving from casual dismissiveness to respectful recognition of Sarah's expertise. The process was aided by several incidents where Sarah's technical recommendations prevented equipment failures that could have disrupted base operations and created significant problems for personnel who depended on reliable systems for their daily work. Seaman Rodriguez found himself assigned to work with Sarah on projects that provided him with exposure to advanced technical procedures and problem-solving approaches that weren't covered in standard Navy training programs. Rodriguez's mechanical background gave him enough knowledge to appreciate the sophistication of Sarah's methods, and he began to understand that her expertise represented the kind of advanced technical knowledge that could be valuable throughout his military career. The educational value of working with Sarah extended beyond technical procedures to include approaches to problem-solving and system analysis that reflected years of experience in environments where equipment failure could have life-and-death consequences. Her methodical approach to diagnosis and repair, her attention to preventive maintenance, and her understanding of how individual components affected overall system performance provided lessons that enhanced the capabilities of military personnel who worked with her. Sarah's reputation throughout Naval Air Station Pensacola continued to evolve as word spread about her performance during the International Summit and her ongoing contributions to base operations. The stories that circulated through informal military communication networks emphasized her technical competence and her calm performance under pressure, but they also included speculation about her background that reflected growing awareness that her contractor role covered a more complex professional history. The speculation was encouraged by Sarah's obvious familiarity with military procedures, her understanding of operational security requirements, and her comfortable interaction with senior officers who clearly respected her expertise. Personnel who'd served in combat zones recognized behavioral patterns and professional competencies that suggested someone with extensive experience in demanding operational environments. Sarah's work assignments began to include projects that required coordination with other bases and military installations, expanding her role beyond Pensacola to include technical support for regional operations. These assignments drew on her expertise with complex systems and her ability to work effectively in environments where mission requirements took precedence over conventional procedures. The expanded responsibilities brought Sarah into contact with military personnel from other installations who were dealing with similar technical challenges and who could benefit from her problem-solving expertise. Her reputation began to spread through professional networks that connected technical personnel across multiple bases, creating opportunities for collaboration on projects that required specialized knowledge and experience. One particularly significant assignment involved providing technical support for a joint training exercise that brought together personnel from multiple branches of the military. The exercise required integration of communication systems, coordination of logistics networks, and synchronization of equipment that had been designed for different operational requirements. Sarah's ability to understand how diverse systems could be made to work together proved essential to the exercise's success. The joint training exercise provided Sarah with opportunities to work with military personnel who hadn't been influenced by preconceptions about civilian contractors or assumptions about her background. Her performance was evaluated purely on results, and the quality of her work earned recognition from officers who were accustomed to working with the military's most capable technical personnel. The exercise also demonstrated Sarah's ability to function effectively in operational environments that required rapid decision-making, flexible problem-solving, and performance under pressure. Her calm competence during equipment failures and her innovative solutions to technical challenges that emerged during complex operations confirmed that her expertise had been developed in circumstances where technical excellence was essential to mission success. Admiral Hayes observed Sarah's performance during the joint exercise with the satisfaction of someone who'd correctly assessed personnel capabilities despite incomplete information about their backgrounds. The exercise confirmed his judgment that Sarah's expertise was valuable enough to justify the security considerations involved in utilizing civilian contractors for sensitive military operations. The Admiral's confidence in Sarah's capabilities led to her inclusion in planning discussions for future operations that would require technical expertise and understanding of how complex systems performed under demanding conditions. These discussions remained within appropriate security boundaries, but they represented a level of trust and professional recognition that reflected her demonstrated competence and reliability. Sarah's expanded role at Naval Air Station Pensacola created opportunities for professional development that had been unavailable during her previous assignments. Working with advanced military systems and participating in complex operations provided her with exposure to technologies and procedures that enhanced her already extensive technical knowledge. The learning opportunities were mutual, as military personnel who worked with Sarah gained insights into problem-solving approaches and system analysis techniques that reflected her unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience. The exchange of expertise benefited both civilian and military personnel, creating collaborative relationships that enhanced the overall technical capabilities of base operations. Sarah's impact extended beyond immediate technical contributions to include improvements in maintenance procedures, system reliability, and operational efficiency that would benefit Naval Air Station Pensacola for years to come. Her work had identified potential problems before they became critical, implemented solutions that enhanced system performance, and established preventive maintenance protocols that reduced the likelihood of future equipment failures. The long-term benefits of Sarah's contributions were particularly evident in the building systems that supported sensitive operations and critical communications. Her optimization of electrical infrastructure, environmental controls, and backup systems had created redundancies and efficiencies that would prove valuable during future emergencies and demanding operational periods. The professional relationships Sarah had developed with military personnel at Pensacola created networks that extended her influence beyond the immediate base environment. Recommendations from Admiral Hayes, Master Chief Walsh, and Chief Petty Officer Chun opened opportunities for assignments that would utilize her expertise at other installations and in support of operations that required the highest levels of technical competence. These recommendations were carefully crafted to highlight Sarah's technical capabilities and professional reliability while respecting the security considerations that limited discussion of her operational background. The result was a professional reputation that accurately reflected her value as a technical resource while maintaining the discretion necessary to protect classified information about her previous experiences. Sarah's success at Naval Air Station Pensacola also demonstrated the value of utilizing civilian contractors whose backgrounds included operational experience in demanding environments. Her ability to understand military requirements, work effectively under pressure, and maintain security protocols while providing essential technical support illustrated how carefully selected civilian personnel could enhance military capabilities without compromising operational security. The model established by Sarah's assignment at Pensacola influenced discussions about how civilian technical expertise could be better integrated into military operations. Her performance provided evidence that contractors with appropriate backgrounds and security clearances could contribute significantly to mission effectiveness while maintaining the professional standards and security awareness essential to military operations. As Sarah continued her work at Naval Air Station Pensacola, her role evolved from invisible contractor to essential technical resource, whose contributions were recognized and valued by personnel throughout the base. The transformation reflected not just her technical competence, but also her ability to earn respect through consistent performance and professional behavior that met the highest military standards. The revelation of her combat scars during the International Summit had provided context for understanding her capabilities, but it was her ongoing performance and professional reliability that solidified her reputation among military personnel who valued competence above credentials. Her work had demonstrated that expertise and dedication could transcend traditional boundaries between civilian and military, roles when mission requirements demanded the best available talent. Sarah Mitchell's story at Naval Air Station Pensacola illustrated how recognition and respect had to be earned through demonstrated performance rather than assumed based on official titles or credentials. Her journey from dismissed contractor to valued technical resource reflected the military's fundamental appreciation for competence and reliability when they were backed by the kind of experience that could only be gained through service in environments where excellence was essential to survival. The quiet professionalism that had initially made Sarah invisible eventually became the foundation for a reputation that commanded respect from personnel who understood that technical excellence was often the key to mission success. Her contributions would continue to benefit Naval Air Station Pensacola long after her assignment ended, and her example would influence how civilian technical expertise was recognized and utilized in future military operations. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. One technical challenge at a time, one problem solved at a time, one relationship built through mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. Sarah Mitchell had found her place in the military community not through official recognition or formal credentials, but through the timeless military values of competence, reliability, and dedication to mission success above personal recognition. 6 months after the International Naval Summit, Naval Air Station Pensacola had become a different place for Sarah Mitchell, though the changes were woven so seamlessly into the fabric of daily operations that newcomers might never realize how dramatically things had shifted. The base hummed with the same purposeful energy that characterized all successful military installations, but Sarah's role in maintaining that success had evolved far beyond what anyone could have imagined when she first drove her white contractor van through the security gates. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as Sarah made her way to Building 47, but now her route included stops at facilities throughout the base where her expertise had become indispensable to operations that extended far beyond routine maintenance. Her tool bag had grown heavier with specialized equipment that reflected expanded responsibilities, and her security credentials provided access to areas that few civilian contractors ever saw. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been the result of dramatic policy changes or official announcements. Instead, it had evolved through the accumulation of successful problem-solving episodes, each one building on the reputation established during the environmental crisis that had saved the International Summit. Military personnel had learned to trust Sarah's judgment not because of her credentials, but because of her consistent ability to deliver results when complex technical challenges threatened mission effectiveness. Admiral Hayes had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates within the naval command structure, though his support was always carefully calibrated to respect the security considerations that surrounded her background. The Admiral understood that Sarah's value extended beyond her technical expertise to include her ability to understand operational requirements and translate them into practical solutions that enhanced mission capabilities. The Admiral's confidence in Sarah's abilities had led to her inclusion in planning sessions for major base improvements and security upgrades that would influence Pensacola's operations for decades to come. These sessions brought together senior officers, technical specialists, and contractors whose combined expertise would determine how effectively the base could support evolving mission requirements in an increasingly complex global security environment. Sarah's contributions to these planning sessions reflected her unique perspective as someone who understood both the technical challenges of maintaining complex systems and the operational realities of how those systems needed to perform under demanding conditions. Her recommendations carried weight because they were based on experience that had been tested in environments where failure could have life and death consequences. The respect Sarah had earned from senior leadership had filtered down through the base's command structure, creating opportunities for collaboration with military personnel who might otherwise have been reluctant to work closely with civilian contractors. Chief Petty Officer Chun had become a regular collaborator on projects that required coordination between different base departments, and their working relationship had evolved into a professional partnership that enhanced the effectiveness of both women. Chun's appreciation for Sarah's capabilities had led to recommendations that brought Sarah's expertise to the attention of personnel at other naval installations who were dealing with similar technical challenges. These recommendations had created a network of professional relationships that extended Sarah's influence beyond Pensacola to include bases throughout the southeastern region of the United States. Master Chief Walsh had become something of a mentor to Sarah, sharing insights about military culture and operational requirements that helped her navigate the complex social dynamics of base life. Walsh's 30 years of experience had taught him to recognize exceptional talent, regardless of the circumstances that brought it to his attention, and he'd made it his mission to ensure that Sarah's capabilities were utilized effectively. Walsh's guidance had been particularly valuable in helping Sarah understand how to maintain appropriate boundaries between her civilian contractor role and the operational knowledge that her background had provided. The balance required careful attention to security protocols, while still being able to contribute meaningfully to discussions about technical challenges that could affect mission success. The relationship between Sarah and the junior personnel, who had initially dismissed her capabilities, had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. Petty Officer Morrison had evolved from casual skeptic to genuine admirer, though the change had required him to acknowledge that his initial assumptions had been not just wrong, but embarrassingly so. Morrison's education had begun with assignments that required him to work directly with Sarah on technical projects that challenged his understanding of complex systems. The experience had revealed gaps in his knowledge that Sarah helped him address through patient instruction that enhanced his capabilities while maintaining his dignity as a professional military member. The learning process had been humbling for Morrison, but it had also been professionally valuable in ways that extended far beyond the specific technical skills he'd acquired. Working with Sarah had taught him to approach problems more systematically, to consider multiple variables before drawing conclusions, and to respect expertise wherever he found it rather than making assumptions based on superficial observations. Seaman Rodriguez had perhaps benefited most from the opportunity to work with Sarah, as his mechanical background provided a foundation that allowed him to absorb advanced technical knowledge more quickly than personnel without similar experience. Rodriguez had become something of an unofficial apprentice, learning approaches to problem-solving and system analysis that would serve him well throughout his military career. The mentoring relationship between Sarah and Rodriguez had developed naturally as they worked together on increasingly complex projects. Sarah's patient instruction and Rodriguez's eager learning had created a dynamic that benefited both participants while also enhancing the base's overall technical capabilities. Rodriguez's growth under Sarah's guidance had been noticed by his supervisors, leading to recommendations for advanced training and increased responsibilities that reflected his enhanced capabilities. The improvement in his performance had created a positive feedback loop that encouraged other junior personnel to seek opportunities to work with Sarah and learn from her expertise. The impact of Sarah's presence at Naval Air Station Pensacola had extended beyond individual relationships to influence the base's overall approach to technical challenges and system maintenance. Her emphasis on preventive maintenance, systematic problem-solving, and comprehensive understanding of how individual components affected overall system performance had become part of the institutional culture. The maintenance protocols that Sarah had developed or improved had reduced equipment failure rates throughout the base, creating efficiencies that freed up resources for other priorities, while also enhancing the reliability of systems that supported critical operations. Her work had demonstrated that investing in proper maintenance and systematic approaches to technical challenges could provide significant returns in terms of operational effectiveness and cost savings. Sarah's influence had also been felt in the base's emergency preparedness procedures, where her experience with crisis response had contributed to more effective protocols for dealing with equipment failures and environmental emergencies. The lessons learned during the International Summit had been incorporated into training programs that prepared personnel to respond more effectively to similar challenges in the future. The reputation Sarah had built at Pensacola had attracted attention from other military installations that were dealing with similar technical challenges or that needed specialized expertise for specific projects. Requests for her services had begun arriving from bases throughout the region, creating opportunities for assignments that would utilize her capabilities while also expanding her professional network within the military community. These external assignments had provided Sarah with exposure to different operational environments and technical challenges that enhanced her already extensive knowledge base. Each new assignment brought opportunities to learn about different systems, work with different teams, and contribute to different types of missions while maintaining the security protocols that protected her background and operational history. The variety of assignments had also demonstrated the versatility of Sarah's expertise and her ability to adapt quickly to new environments and requirements. Her success at different installations had reinforced her reputation as a technical resource who could be counted on to deliver results regardless of the specific challenges involved. Admiral Hayes had leveraged Sarah's growing reputation to secure resources for base improvements and technology upgrades that might not have been approved without her involvement. Her technical assessments and recommendations carried weight with higher command levels because they were based on demonstrated expertise and successful performance in demanding operational environments. The Admiral's ability to point to specific examples of how Sarah's expertise had enhanced base operations and prevented potential crises had made it easier to justify investments in advanced equipment and comprehensive maintenance programs that would benefit Pensacola for years to come. Her work had provided concrete evidence of the value that properly utilized civilian expertise could bring to military operations. Sarah's success had also influenced discussions at higher command levels about how civilian contractors with appropriate backgrounds and security clearances could be better integrated into military operations. Her performance had provided a model for how such integration could be accomplished while maintaining operational security and respecting the unique requirements of military environments. The evolving relationship between Sarah and the base community had created unexpected opportunities for cultural exchange and mutual learning that enriched the experience of military and civilian personnel alike. Sarah's presence had challenged assumptions about civilian capabilities while also providing military personnel with insights into different approaches to problem solving and professional development. The informal mentoring relationships that had developed between Sarah and various military personnel had created networks of knowledge sharing that enhanced the capabilities of everyone involved. Military personnel learned advanced technical skills and problem-solving approaches, while Sarah gained deeper understanding of military culture and operational requirements. These relationships had also demonstrated that professional respect and collaboration could transcend traditional boundaries between civilian and military roles when they were based on mutual recognition of expertise and shared commitment to key mission success. The example set by successful collaboration had influenced other interactions between civilian contractors and military personnel throughout the base. Sarah's impact on Naval Air Station Pensacola had been measured not just in terms of technical achievements, but also in the development of human resources and the enhancement of institutional capabilities that would continue to benefit the base. Long after her assignment ended, her work had created lasting improvements in both systems and people that represented a significant return on the investment in her services. The security considerations that had initially complicated Sarah's integration into base operations had been successfully managed through careful attention to protocols and boundaries that protected sensitive information while still allowing her expertise to be utilized effectively. The balance had required constant vigilance, but it had proven that civilian contractors with appropriate backgrounds could contribute significantly to military operations without compromising security. The lessons learned from Sarah's successful integration had implications that extended beyond Naval Air Station Pensacola to influence how other military installations approach the utilization of civilian expertise. Her example had demonstrated that properly managed civilian-military collaboration could enhance operational effectiveness while maintaining the security and professional standards essential to military success. As Sarah continued her work at Pensacola, her role had stabilized into a position that maximized her contributions while respecting the constraints that surrounded her background and the security requirements of military operations. She had found a professional niche that utilized her capabilities effectively while providing the kind of meaningful work that made use of her extensive knowledge and experience. The transformation from invisible contractor to essential technical resource had been complete, but it had also opened new possibilities for professional growth and contribution that extended far beyond what anyone had imagined when Sarah first arrived at Naval Air Station Pensacola. Her journey had demonstrated that expertise and dedication could create opportunities for service and recognition even when they emerged from circumstances that couldn't be fully explained or publicly acknowledged. The base continued to benefit from Sarah's expertise on a daily basis, but her influence had expanded to include contributions to regional operations, collaboration with other installations, and participation in planning efforts that would shape military technical capabilities for years to come. Her work had transcended the boundaries of a single assignment to become part of a broader contribution to military effectiveness and operational excellence. Sarah Mitchell's story at Naval Air Station Pensacola had become part of the base's unofficial history, a reminder that competence and character could overcome initial misconceptions, and that the most valuable contributions often came from unexpected sources. Her example would continue to influence how personnel approach their work and their relationships with colleagues whose backgrounds might be different from their own. The quiet professionalism that had initially made Sarah nearly invisible had ultimately become the foundation for a reputation that commanded respect throughout the military community. Her success had been built not on dramatic gestures or official recognition, but on the accumulation of excellent work performed with integrity and dedication to mission success above personal advancement. The work continued as it always had. One technical challenge at a time, one problem solved at a time, one relationship built through mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. Sarah Mitchell had found her place in the military community through the timeless values of competence, reliability, and service to something larger than herself, proving that the most important contributions were often made by those who sought no recognition beyond the satisfaction of work done well. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.